Norman rushed back to the basement where they were holding their prisoner and found the man teetering on the edge of a meltdown. Desperation painted his bloodshot eyes as he saw Norman burst in, and his voice came out as a thin croak. "I'll confess. I promise I'll reveal everything." Maintaining an icy calm demeanor, Norman put Jack and Jonathan on speakerphone and sat down in front of their captive. "What took you so long?" "They have my brother. If I talk, they'll kill him." The man rubbed his raw rope burns on his wrists in a futile attempt to distract from his psychological agony. Suddenly, his body tremored and his eyes rolled back into his head. Norman slapped him to keep him conscious. "Just ask me your damn questions. All I ask is to sleep." A cold chuckle escaped from Norman. "You better hope your mind is sharp then. If you lie to me, the torment you'll suffer will make this look like a tea party." "I swear, I'll tell you the truth." Norman grabbed his chin and locked eyes with him, his gaze unyielding. "Who's your leader? His name? His headquarters?" "I don't know his real name. We just call him Jefe, the chief. He's some bigwig, operates factories and shipping all over the Caribbean." The man's voice was frantic, and he took sharp, shallow breaths. "He operates out of Cuba. The president is his protector. He has total impunity to run drugs, weapons, anything he wants." "Where is his base of operations? Does he even come to the U.S.? "I don't know. I only met him once. I was blindfolded and flown in circles before we landed at his compound. All I know is it's on the coast." "Can you describe him? His age?" "About 50. I wasn't allowed to see his face, but he's tall and strong. Must have been over 6 feet. Oh, he has a son, but no one I know has ever seen him." "Just one son? No daughters? Any other family?" "That's the only one he's mentioned. But who knows if—" The man trailed off, and Norman yanked him to his feet, shaking him back to his senses. "We're not done here. When were you last there?" 6 months ago, as a reward for a job well done." Suddenly, the man's voice was tinged with regret. "I took my younger brother along. He's just a kid, totally innocent. I never expected them to take him." He paused, his gaze rising to meet Norman's. "That's everything I know. Please, just let me sleep." Norman narrowed his eyes. "What's your brother's name?" "What? Why?" "Just tell me." "His name is Ryan." The man sputtered, pain etched onto his face. "I haven't seen him in months." "If we go there, we'll search for him." Norman sat the man back in his chair. "Your endurance is impressive. If you've been honest with us, we'll rescue your brother. If not, death will seem like mercy to both of you." As he finished speaking, Norman dripped solvent on the man's eyelids and allowed them to close. As he prepared to untie him, he saw that the man had immediately drifted into a catatonic slumber. Back in New York, Jonathan furrowed his brow in thought. Cuba was an enigma to him. It had been cut off from the United States for decades, and he couldn't imagine how such a powerful, far-reaching rival had come to operate there. Between the burdensome travel restrictions and the complex visa process, it was a different place to visit and a nearly impossible one to do business. Jonathan spread a map on his desk and tried to imagine how they would ever hunt this man down on his own turf. They'd gotten tantalizingly little information from the prisoner, but at least it was a start. In the meantime, Jonathan ordered his men to secretly surveil Dan and his manager, and wait for their enemies to make the next move. Soon after arriving at work the next morning, Jonathan was interrupted by a knock at his door. He secretly stepped in with a nervous expression. "Sir, I have Mr. and Miss Porter here to see you. They didn't schedule an appointment, but insisted it's urgent." Jonathan's eyebrow lifted in surprise. Was this a peace offering? Or a Trojan horse? Either way, they were on his turf. He was confident he had the advantage. "Send them in." Jonathan scrutinized Brock and Ashley as the secretary ushered them. They took their seats on the opposite couches, and Jonathan leaned back, speaking nonchalantly. Well then, to what do I owe the annoyance? Brock flinched at his provocation, and Jonathan couldn't help but notice that he looked less controlled than usual, an indication that his business maneuvers were having the desired effect. Brock clenched his fists and locked eyes with Jonathan. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, Ashley leapt off the couch and lunged toward Jonathan. Big brother. Jonathan spun to the side and got to his feet, his frown growing darker and his voice chilling with the undercurrent of warning. I'm warning you, Ashley. Keep your distance. She staggered back with a hurt look on her face, and Brock finally interjected. I apologize for my overzealous sister, but what she said is true. Ashley is your half-sister. Jonathan snorted, unimpressed. Oh, really? You expect me to believe that? What's next? You're going to want a family discount on one of our cars? Maybe a low-interest loan to prop up your drowning company? I expect better from you, Brock. Brock stiffened under Jonathan's scornful gaze, but he met it in kind. On the contrary, Jonathan, my family doesn't resort to such tactics. We're here for strictly personal reasons. We have every indication that Ashley is in fact your half-sister. Jonathan's instinct was to laugh, but Brock's earnest expression gave him pause. Returning to the couch, he reclined in his seat and crossed his legs. Then please, indulge me in this little tall tale of yours. As Brock's story began, Jonathan remained defiantly amused. But the longer he went, and the more holes it filled in his father's life story, the more Jonathan began to believe it. Furthermore, Brock's father was known for his pride. If he knew that Brock was airing out his family's dirty laundry to their biggest rival, he'd be outraged. By the time Brock's story was finished, Jonathan had leaned forward, deep in thought. Could Ashley indeed be his sister? Convinced that Brock believed what he was saying, Jonathan stood and straightened his suit. I have to admit it sounds plausible. We should get a DNA test. Lead the way, bro. She winked at Jonathan, and he frowned at her overfamiliarity. The last thing he wanted was to be related to these people, but he already had a sneaking suspicion they were telling the truth. Just then, Nancy was arriving at the Davis group after a meeting, planning to surprise Jonathan with a box of chocolate-covered strawberries. Her excitement to see him only grew as she rode his private elevator to the top floor, but when the door slid open, she was met with an utterly baffling scene. Directly in front of her, Jonathan, Brock, and Ashley were waiting for the elevator. Their vibe was unusually cordial, and Jonathan stood in the middle while Ashley looked up at him with adoration. As Nancy locked eyes with Ashley, her temper ignited. What is this? Oh, hi, Maria. My brother and I were just going out for a bit. Hearing Ashley refer to Jonathan as her brother caused Nancy to involuntarily clench her fists, crushing the box of strawberries she was holding. But even more unsettling was Jonathan's tactic accepting her intimate language. Nancy's eyes narrowed incredulously, and Jonathan stepped forward, reaching out to touch her hand. Maria, what's brought you here? Nothing. I was looking for Steve. Enjoy your afternoon. Sensing her anger, Jonathan deftly encircled her with his arm, drawing her near and whispering in her ear. Darling, don't jump to conclusions. I promise you there's an explanation. Nancy tried to wriggle free, but Jonathan's grip remained steadfast. I need to find Steve. Just come downstairs with us. Boiling with rage, Nancy nevertheless realized that making a scene in the office, particularly in front of Brock and Ashley, would hardly help matters. She saved her retaliation for the elevator, stomping on Jonathan's foot as he swung around behind her. The entire elevator ride was silent, with Nancy eyeing Ashley in her peripherals until the doors opened to the parking garage. Jonathan stepped out first, leading Nancy alongside him. Dr. Chang's clinic is 5 minutes away. We'll meet you there. Jonathan pulled Nancy into the back seat of the car and wrapped her in a comforting hug. But Nancy remained icy, still trying to extradite herself from his hold. Spotting the box of strawberries in her hand, Jonathan pried them from her grip and opened the box. Well, well, well. Did you bring this treat for us to enjoy together? Nancy turned away. I told you, they're for Steve. We both know that's not true. Jonathan selected a strawberry from the tattered box and loudly savored the taste. Suddenly, he pulled Nancy in, sharing a fervent kiss that passed the sweetness on her lips. Furious but helpless, she struggled against his hold, her fists creasing his shirt as her grip on it grew tighter. Drawing back, Jonathan touched her nose, his lips curved into a grin. Someone is feeling jealous. Nancy kept her eyes shut, her fury simmering beneath the surface. Jonathan chose another strawberry and offered it to Nancy's lips. When she refused, he leaned in and whispered, If you don't eat it, I have no qualms about feeding you like I did just a second ago. Reluctantly, Nancy opened her mouth and accepted the strawberry. When she swallowed her bite, she jabbed her finger into his chest and glared at him. Why did you let her stand so close to you? And what is she doing calling you brother? Jonathan absorbed the punch, letting Nancy vent her rage before pulling her back against him. Darling, he started gently. Ashley might really be my half-sister. We're getting a DNA test today. What? Nancy stuttered, blindsided by the revelation. What are you talking about? Jonathan relayed the tale he'd heard, his hand tracing a soothing path on Nancy's cheek. I can't believe this. You're sure it's not some kind of trick? You don't think they're after anything? I wouldn't give them anything even if they were. But if she really is a Davis, if she's my sister, I want to know. Nancy bitterly recalled the time Ashley forced her to compete for Jonathan's love. It's not that Ashley ever stood a chance of winning, but her audacity and entitlement still rubbed Nancy the wrong way. If she turned out to be his sister, Nancy would only have to tolerate her that much more often. Sensing her frustration, Jonathan showered her with kisses. Darling, no half-sister could ever replace you. A wife is forever. Nobody can take your place. Nancy sulked. Why couldn't she be your half-brother? Jonathan grinned, delivering a swift kiss to her lips. If you want me to treat Ashley like a brother, it's as good as done. You've seen how hard I am on Steve. Taken by surprise, Nancy let out a laugh despite herself. Jonathan offered her another strawberry, and this time she took it without complaint. See, I would die on my own sword before I'd feed Ashley a strawberry, especially if she's my sister. Ew, don't be weird about it, says the one who got engaged to her brother. Nancy scoffed and smacked him. We weren't related. Nancy maintained her sulking expression, but Jonathan laughed, pecking her with kisses until they arrived at the DNA testing center. As the car came to a stop, Nancy climbed off his lap and Jonathan took a deep breath, locking eyes with her. You ready? Time to find out if you have a new sister-in-law. Jonathan and Nancy left Dr. Chang's clinic a half an hour later, with results promised in less than 20 hours. They made their way home, and Jonathan cooked an elaborate apology dinner for Nancy. But just as they finished eating, he felt his phone buzz in his pocket. Seeing that it was Kim's father, Jonathan could only assume the worst. What do you want, James? James's voice came back shaky. It's Kim. She's fading fast. She wants to see you. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. I'm on my way. He hung up and turned to Nancy with a grave expression. I'm sorry, Maria. Kim's condition is critical. She wants me there for her final moments. Nancy sat dumbfounded. I should come with you. Maybe my blood can help her. Jonathan shook his head and put a calming hand on her shoulder. Your blood can only offer nutrients. Her organs are failing. We always knew this day would come. A look of fear sparked in Nancy's eyes. What if it's a trap? How do you know she isn't already dead, and he's just trying to finish the job? I already thought of that. I'll bring backup. Don't worry. He quickly changed clothes, then leaned down to plant a gentle kiss on Nancy's forehead. Don't wait up for me tonight, love. I have no idea how long this might take. Just stay safe, and tell her goodbye for me. I will. Slipping on his coat, Jonathan strode out. Earlier that evening, Kim had lost consciousness for the second time that day, and James had called her doctors to do an emergency exam. He waited outside while the team checked her vitals, and when the doctor emerged with a grim expression, James had to clench the wall for support. How bad is it? Should I call an ambulance? The doctor shook his head. I think we're past that, Mr. Reynolds. The best we can do now is make her comfortable in her final hours. I gave her a few injections to make sure she was alert and not in pain. Go spend some time with her. At the sound of the news, James's phone slipped from his grasp, shattering on impact with the floor. Tears fell from his eyes as he entered Kim's room, but he mustered a smile. How do you feel, darling? I'm okay. They gave me something for the pain. Kim watched him closely as he sat down next to her bed. Their relationship had been fractured ever since the revelation about what he did to Jonathan and his family. But knowing she was living her final moments, she found her heart softening for the man who had cared for her so tirelessly over the years. Wiping his tears away, James managed a playful look. Well, as long as you're comfortable, what do you say we look at some pictures? I found some albums we haven't flipped through in years. Kim nodded, and as he cracked open the album, her face lit up with the sight of her mother. My God, she was so beautiful. You were a lucky man, Dad. I just wish you could have known her in life. You two are more alike than you could possibly imagine. Make sure you remember what she looks like, so you can find her in the next life. Kim laughed. Don't worry, Dad. I'll never forget your faces. When they finished, James placed the album aside and took her hand. Is there anything you want? Anything you'd like to do? Kim looked away, contemplating the request she was about to make. It would hurt her father, but it was truly the only thing she wanted. Mustering her courage, she looked up at him with teary eyes. I want to see Jonathan. She heard her father's breath catch in his throat, but after a long beat, he nodded. Okay, Kim. I'll call him. By the time Jonathan and his bodyguards arrived, the doctors estimated that she had less than an hour left. Wasting no time, Jonathan pushed the door open and stepped into the muted glow of her room. Her eyes flared with life at the sight of him. Jonathan, you made it. Of course I did. I wasn't sure my dad would call. Jonathan sat down next to her and took her hand in his. It's getting late, you know. What are you still doing awake? There's a meteor shower tonight. Would you stay up and watch it with me? Jonathan drew a sharp breath, and after a moment, he managed to nod. Oh, of course, Kim. Anything you want. He fetched the wheelchair from across the room and pushed it over, but she dismissed it with a firm shake of her head. No, I spent too much time in that two-wheeled prison. I want to walk. Nodding in agreement, Jonathan helped her into her coat, then offered his arm for support. When they finally reached the courtyard, he helped her onto a bench and put his arm around her, pulling her head onto his shoulder. Jonathan, do you remember when I was little and you tried to cheer me up by planting those crystals in the garden and telling me crystal trees would sprout from the ground when I got better? Jonathan laughed. How could I forget? I've never seen anyone so excited for anything. Kim lifted her head and locked eyes with him. Could you find them for me? A wave of nostalgia washed over Jonathan, and he struggled to hold back tears. Of course. Let's see if I remember where they are. Jonathan snapped off a nearby branch to use as a digging tool, then navigated to the base of a particular tree, his memory guiding him. He scraped the earth away with his stick, and before long, he unearthed a handful of crystals. They shimmered in his palm, just like they had the day he buried them. He thought of Kim as a child, frail but always smiling, her eyes sparkling with curiosity and imagination. He'd always felt so lucky to know her, and a somber heaviness settled in his heart as he dusted off the crystals and returned to the bench where she was waiting. You won't believe this. He opened his hand to reveal the crystals, and Kim's face lit up with joy. Really? They're still there? Every one of them. Kim took one and held it up to the moonlight, marveling at it like a priceless treasure. Just then, the night sky exploded with light. Her delight was infectious as she pointed at the sky. Oh my God! The meteor shower! It's actually here! As Jonathan held her close and watched the dazzling display above them, he found himself at a loss for words. Before long, Kim laid her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, muttering a prayer just loud enough for Jonathan to hear. You owe me, God, and I'm calling in my favors. Please help Jonathan and Maria live the long, happy lives they deserve. Please forgive my father for the pain he's caused, and help him find peace. In my next lifetime, all I wish for is a healthy body that can run freely under the sun, and a beating heart that can love without bounds. The meteor shower's glow bathed her face as she whispered her wishes to the stars, and then, as suddenly as it began, the celestial display faded. When Jonathan finally looked back down, Kim's face was frozen in a final, peaceful smile. She had drawn her last breath. A sharp pang shot through his chest as he softly called out to her, Kim. But his words only echoed in the hushed silence of the courtyard. He held her close, and a tear rolled down his cheek. His voice steady but sorrowful. Your wishes will be granted, Kim. I promise. With a sigh of resignation, he gently lifted her frail body into his arms and began the agonizing journey back inside. From the moment James spotted Jonathan holding her, James knew his world had come crashing down. His legs gave way, and he collapsed, grief pouring out of him in a flood of tears. Kim! Kim! His cry ripped through the quiet night. How can I carry on without you? He looked at his daughter lying peacefully in Jonathan's arms, a faint smile still on her lips. It was as if someone had torn his heart into pieces. The thought that Jonathan had been with her at the end instead of him brought on a swell of pain and bitterness. Choking back his emotions, he looked up at Jonathan with tear-filled eyes. Please stay. Escort Kim on her final journey with me. It's what she would have wanted. Jonathan nodded, his voice calm. You know I would do anything for her. A heavy silence stretched between them as Kim's body was taken away and the doctors began clearing out their medical equipment. By dawn, Kim's body had been cremated and returned to them in a delicate blue and white porcelain urn. Within an hour, Jonathan and Norman joined James on his boat and began sailing out of New York Harbor toward the open sea. Kim had insisted that her remains not end up in the cold, dark earth, but in the ocean, allowing her to travel to all the unseen places she had never had the opportunity to go. A few hours passed before they were beyond the sight of land, and Jonathan watched as James held the urn aloft, releasing Kim into the endless blue. Her ashes danced in the air before dissolving into the ocean's depths. Goodbye, Kim, Jonathan murmured, his gaze fixed on the churning sea. James placed the empty urn down and wiped away his tears. As Jonathan looked up from the water, James locked eyes with him, his voice firm. Jonathan, we need to settle our accounts. Jonathan returned his gaze, a serene calm in his eyes. There's nothing left to settle, James. Kim made her choices. Why don't we respect them? The corner of James's mouth turned up in a disconcerting smirk. I may not be a match for you and your goons, but I have something you don't. And what might that be? Nothing left to lose. James's eyes filled with tears again, but his expression suddenly seemed tinged with insanity. As my final gift to my daughter, I've arranged for the two men she loved the most to join her in death. With a swift motion, James threw open his jacket. Jonathan's eyes widened at the sight of the explosive strapped to his chest, gleaming under the morning light. It was more than enough to blow the yacht apart. I bet you thought I was going to back down, didn't you, Jonathan? James cackled. Thought you controlled all the explosives in the city? Well, It turns out that you and the Davis family have made quite a few enemies besides me. In fact, they hate you so much that they gave this to me for free." Jonathan's composure seemed to amuse James as he continued. "You think your men can stop me before the explosion? Shoot me if you want, but as soon as I let go of this button, we'll all be turned to vapor. No one can save you this time, not even my foolish daughter." Jonathan's men tensed. Half of them sprinted towards James, while the others formed a protective circle around Jonathan. As chaos broke out, James let out a final, maniacal laugh and released the button. Oblivious to Jonathan's accident, Brock arrived at work the next morning to an onslaught of distressing reports from his aides. The Davis Group had unexpectedly released a new product line specifically designed to undercut their market share on the eve of a disastrous financial report. Each new data point fanned his anger further until he flung his desk clear of papers in a fit of frustration. His phone vibrated and he ignored the caller ID, snapping into the receiver. "I'm swamped. Call me back later." But the sound of his father's voice cut him off. "Shut up and listen. The board has decided to strip you of all your current duties, effective immediately. We're announcing the closure of our New York operations in 1 hour." Before Brock could respond, Lewis hung up. Brock clenched the phone, feeling like he had been doused with ice water. However, he quickly found himself smiling. He didn't have any interest in his father's business to begin with, and he would sooner forfeit his entire inheritance than apologize and beg for his job. It wasn't like he was helpless. In fact, stepping away from the Porter family would be just the push he needed to reach the next level. He left his office and strode into Austin's. "You can stop working. They're shutting down the office, and the old man relieved me of my duties." Engrossed in a call with a client, Austin hastily wrapped up the conversation. "You know how he can be, Brock. He always loses it when you go your own way on things. I'm sure if you give him some time." "No need," Brock interjected, an old memory springing to life. "Do you remember Aaron from college?" Austin nodded. "He used to say that he'd rather live in his car than depend on others. He hated charity from his parents most of all. Well, I ran into him at my mom's funeral, and it turns out he took a job from his dad the second he graduated. They've only been running the company for 5 years now, but he looks like he's aged 20. What's your point? Lewis has been looking down on me for years. He disapproved of my marriage. He never supported me as CEO. And now he's going to pin this entire thing on me? If he'd only given me the resources I needed to take advantage of Brightstar's collapse, none of this would be happening. It's the final blow. Aaron was right. I'd rather have nothing than take another handout from him. Starting today, I'm carving my own path." Austin reeled from Brock's rebellious declaration, pausing before he responded. "You know I'm with you either way. If you're setting sail on your own, count me in. But are you certain about this? What about Hannah?" "I'll take care of her. I'll do whatever it takes." Austin sighed. "Then I guess that's that." Standing up from his chair, he grabbed his nameplate off his desk, snapped it in half, and threw it in the trash. That afternoon, Brock and Austin met up with Ashley to collect the results of the DNA test. Brock called Jonathan to arrange a time when they could meet, but the call went straight to voicemail. He then tried Jack, and it took 4 consecutive calls to get through. "Mr. Porter, how may I assist you?" Jack's voice sounded drained. "I need to connect with Jonathan, but his phone is off. We're getting the test results this afternoon, and he promised he'd be here." Jack paused conspicuously before responding. "I'm afraid he's tied up, but I'll let him know you called." Brock's irritation flared. "Busy plotting against me, is he? Tell him I said his timing on that production launch was impeccable. Is he really so heartless that he can't take 30 minutes away from bringing me down to find out if he has a sister? I'll let him know you called." Jack hung up, leaving Brock seething. "What's the matter?" Ashley asked. "He thinks he's too good for us, That's the matter. Apparently his work is too important for him to pick up his phone, and his little errand boy wouldn't even tell me when he was free. I don't care what the test says anymore. He'll never truly be a brother to you, Ashley. He's made his point loud and clear. Nancy woke up mid-morning, surprised to see that Jonathan still hadn't made it home. She tried calling Jonathan and Norman, but neither could be reached. And as her anxiety flared, she scrolled through social media, only to be greeted with the news of a yacht explosion. Early details were vague, but pictures of the wreckage left Nancy's heart drumming wildly against her ribs. An unshakable sense of dread washing over her. She immediately rang Jack. "Have you heard from Jonathan? Did you see the news about the yacht?" "No word since last night. We just got satellite images of the wreckage, and I'm forwarding them to you now." Nancy gasped when she saw the scale of destruction. The ship had been all but vaporized, but as soon as she sorted through the images, one close-up caught her eye. It was a sign, tarnished but still bearing the name of the vessel. The Aegis. Her heart dropped like a stone. It was the yacht they'd used for Steve's birthday right after her rebirth. A quick reply from Jack confirmed her worst fears. The Aegis was James's yacht. Within 30 minutes, Nancy was stepping on board a speedboat and hurtling across the water toward the site of the accident. Ordinarily, her PTSD would have made her hesitant to take a boat into open water. But her mind was so flooded with concern for Jonathan that there was no room left for anything else. The waves became increasingly tumultuous as they left the Long Island Sound, and the wind cut through their clothes like a knife. Concerned for Nancy's well-being, Jack quickly shed his jacket and handed it to her. "Take it. You're still recuperating." Nancy glared at his thin shirt and shook her head. "Keep your coat. We'll need you to make some calls soon. I'll just wait in the cabin until we get there." Nancy soon found herself in an eerily familiar space. Below deck, in a small room with no windows, and the floor undulating beneath her. Panic surged within her, but she reined it in, stubbornly holding on to the handrails and focusing her thoughts on Jonathan. He told her he'd return. He was meticulous in his actions. She knew he wouldn't have confronted James unprepared, and he wouldn't have put himself in harm's way without contingencies. So, she waited and hoped, in the quiet darkness of the cabin, for the man she loved to return. Time felt like it was stretching into eternity, but after 2 long hours, she felt the boat slow down and heard Jack's voice from outside. "We're here, Maria." She emerged from the cabin with her heart and stomach tied in knots. And as soon as the fresh air hit her lungs, nausea swept over her like a tidal wave. She darted to the side of the speedboat and emptied the contents of her stomach overboard. Jack was quick to her side, supporting her with one hand and offering water with the other. When she finally regained her stability, Nancy's gaze was drawn to the debris bobbing on all sides of them. The sight of it hit her like a truck, and she suddenly found it impossible to imagine how anyone could have survived such a blast. The devastating reality set her staggering to her knees, with tears of helplessness streaming down her face. Digging in her pocket, she pulled out Zara and implored it to find Jonathan, but no matter how wide she made the search parameters, there was no sign of either Aries or his phone. In the meantime, Jack dispatched additional speedboats to scour the area and track down any other boats that might have been in the vicinity the night before. They were in a busy shipping channel that served the entire Atlantic, and there was a thin possibility that another vessel had stumbled across survivors. Nancy studied Zara's screen as it displayed Coast Guard's records for the last 24 hours. According to Zara's analysis, the closest vessel at the time of the accident was a Cuban fishing boat. Her eyes narrowed. Could it be a coincidence? Or could their adversaries have somehow been involved? She handed Zara to Jack, and his face blanched, immediately understanding the implications. "You think James was working with someone else? If they got to Stark, why wouldn't they have been able to get to him? For all we know, they caused the car accident that started this whole thing to begin with." Jack shook his head in disbelief. "Any chances they would have wanted him alive? We can't ignore the possibility. Can you get us into Cuba?" Jack locked eyes with her, his expression betraying the grimness of the scenario she'd conjured up. No one goes in and out of Cuba without pre-clearance, especially not Americans. We'd be arrested immediately, or worse. Then what about the government? Can we go through them? Not a chance. There's no diplomatic relationship, and they're notoriously difficult to negotiate with. If they have him, and if they're willing to talk, all we can do is wait for them to reach out to us. There has to be something we can do, Jack. Someone we can call. Just then, Nancy and Jack were interrupted by a shout from a crew member. We found someone! Nancy rushed over as they hauled a body out of the water, its face frozen in a mask of horror, and its lower half completely blown away. Nancy gasped as she recognized it as one of Jonathan's most trusted bodyguards. She'd seen him personally accompany Jonathan dozens of times, never more than a few feet behind him. She shuddered at the possibility of finding Jonathan's corpse in a similar state. Before long, reports started coming in from Jack's other rescue boats. Found another body. It appears to be the captain. Looks like he survived the blast but drowned waiting for rescue. We just boarded a Greek shipping vessel that picked up 2 of our men's bodies. Still no sign of Jonathan or Norman. Found another of James' men, or at least part of him. Just found the wreckage of the boat we had trailing James's. That must have been one hell of a bomb. After every update, Nancy's heart raged with a mix of sadness for the dead, relief that it wasn't Jonathan, and terror at what might come next. Nancy reeled as the number of casualties went up and up. Not a single person had been found alive, and at least a dozen were still missing. As evening settled in, their speedboat began to run low on fuel. They set a course for a nearby cruise ship that had dropped anchor to help with the search, and Nancy and Jack both opted to stay aboard the larger boat with a radio to keep them updated. As darkness fell, the rescuers' task became even more challenging. A helicopter buzzed overhead, conducting a low-altitude grid-by-grid search, and massive spotlights were installed on the boats to allow them to work around the clock. Finally, a glimmer of hope from one of the speedboats. We found a survivor! Jack sprang into action. Get him to the cruise ship, now! Then more good news from the helicopter. We've got another live one. Get the medical team ready. For the first time all day, Nancy felt a glimmer of hope, and as the first survivor was carried on board, she rushed up alongside him. It was one of Jonathan's men. Jack immediately began peppering him with questions. What the hell happened out there? We followed the protocol, I swear. He sucked air through his teeth, clutching his abdomen in pain. We had a tactical boat behind them the whole way, but the explosion took them out too. On the deck was just chaos. James had a massive bomb strapped to him. We were all wearing body armor. There was nothing we could do. What about Jonathan? I was right next to him when the bomb went off, but everything after that is a blur. I'm sorry. He turned to Maria, his eyes welling with tears. I'm so sorry, Maria. I did everything I could. She took his hand. I know you did. You'll be all right. She turned to the nurses assembled behind her. Get him inside. Throughout the night, more and more survivors were plucked from the water, most having drifted miles from the wreckage due to the current. Out of Jonathan's 15 men, 7 had survived. And as the clock passed midnight, Jonathan and Norman remained the only ones still missing. The inky black of the night seemed to combine with Nancy's anxiety to slow time to a halt. She stood on the deck and stared down at the abyss below, the waves seemingly poised to swallow her soul. The wind bit through her despite her layers, and before long she began feeling weak, her body cold and aching. Suddenly, her grip on the railing slackened, her legs buckled, and her vision blurred. Ma'am, what's wrong? A concerned voice echoed in her ears. Are you okay? Before Nancy could respond, Jack's frantic voice crackled over the receiver. We found Norman. He's been hit with shrapnel. Prepare for emergency surgery. Fear gripped Nancy, and she tried to rush toward Jack's voice, but her world spun, and she collapsed to the deck, unconscious. When Jonathan awoke, the first thing he saw was a moonless, starless sky, stretching endlessly before him. He felt the gentle wake of a boat and glanced around to find himself on the deck of a modest fishing boat, docked at an unknown harbor. A nearby thicket of trees swayed in the warm air, and though Jonathan had no clue where he was or how long he'd been there, he knew he was nowhere near New York City. After a moment to gather his thoughts, he dug through his pockets and found everything still there, and still protected by waterproof cases. He fished his phone out, but to his surprise, there was no signal. Given his condition, it seemed like whoever pulled him from the wreckage didn't mean him harm. But he had no intention of sticking around to find out. He needed to figure out where he was, find some food and water, and get in touch with Jack and Maria. Struggling to his feet, he snuck past a sleeping sailor and off the boat, and sought cover in the nearby forest. As he walked, he played back the explosion in his mind, struggling to piece everything together. He and Norman had foreseen James' attack, but they never had expected him to have so many explosives. They'd been able to leap off the boat just before the explosion and avoid the worst of it. But as they clung to bits of floating debris, Jonathan realized Norman had taken a large piece of shrapnel in the gut. Cobbling bits of wood together, he made a raft to get Norman out of the water. Then, when he spotted a boat's lights off the horizon, he left Norman behind and attempted to swim for help. Unfortunately, his own injuries and exhaustion caught up with him, and after 2 miles of swimming, he'd lost consciousness. Evidently, the fishing boat had found him there and brought him along. Jonathan's body screamed in protest as he trudged through the forest, aches running through every fiber of his being, but he forced himself to carry on. If he got lost in the woods, it could spell the end for him, and he had to assume that the location of the dock meant there were people nearby. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spotted the twinkling lights of a small town through the trees. He stepped out of the forest and onto the road, and the sign he saw in front of him stopped him in his tracks. He was 40 miles from Havana. Someone had brought him to Cuba. His mind reeling with possibilities, Jonathan dashed back into the forest. Could it possibly be a coincidence that he'd wound up on the home turf of his most powerful enemy? But if it wasn't, why hadn't they already killed him? Or even tied him up? Whatever the answer, it was going to be far harder to get home than he initially imagined. Wrestling with his options, he decided it would be safer to wait until morning to explore further. When dawn finally broke, Jonathan took his first careful steps into the fishing village, swiping a hat off a clothesline and pulling it low over his face to avoid drawing attention. He then ducked into a quiet cafe to eat, but when he offered his international credit card for payment, the owner shook his head and indicated they only took cash. Stymied by the language barrier, Jonathan took off his hat and used hand gestures to indicate his foreign status and lack of local currency. Upon seeing his face, the woman's eyes widened in surprise. After a moment of shock, she turned to her staff, spoke rapidly in Spanish, and warmly ushered Jonathan deeper into the establishment. When he finally stood up to leave, the woman handed him a small stack of Cuban pesos and handed him a map with directions to the train station. As much as he appreciated the help, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing someone else's game. A chill ran down his spine as a terrifying theory formed in his mind. Was it possible that all his actions were being watched? But if an enemy were pulling the strings, why hadn't they struck yet? As he mulled the possibilities, he set off for the train station. Jonathan arrived in Havana in less than an hour, a smile spreading across his face, as he took in the colorful, bustling capital city he'd only seen in pictures. The sidewalks were teeming with busy people, the antique cars sputtering down every street. It was as if he'd stepped back in time to the 1950s. Hoping to draw out some information on whoever was tracking him, Jonathan made his way to the most glamorous hotel in town and sat down at the old oak bar in the lobby. Scanning the top shelf for the most expensive liquor, he spotted a vintage brandy owned by Louis XIII and ordered a round for everyone at the bar. Looking Jonathan up and down, the bartender seemed to hesitate because of his ordinary clothes. He stepped closer and spoke to him in remarkably fluent English. "Do you know how much that costs?" Jonathan smirked. and handed over his Swiss bank card. "Price doesn't matter." The bartender took Jonathan's card and narrowed his eyes. "You're American." "That's right. I came down to talk business with the guy that owns this place." The bartender's eyes got huge. "You met with Mr. Davidson? Or do you mean one of his sons?" The mention of the name Davidson made Jonathan's heart skip a beat, but he maintained his composure. If they had any connection to his ancestors, that would explain all the strange things that had happened since he arrived. "I know the old man," Jonathan replied coolly. The bartender looked like he might faint, his excitement palpable. "What was he like? All we hear around here are rumors." "He prefers it that way." "Welcome to Cuba. Communism without a conscience, I like to say." Jonathan narrowed his eyes. He couldn't be sure where the man's loyalty was, but it clearly wasn't the government, and he couldn't afford to pass up a chance of getting more information. Glancing around to make sure no one was listening, Jonathan leaned forward. "Tell me, what's up with the eagle tattoo I keep seeing on people's wrists? And why are they always tough guys?" The bartender's face went pale, and he suddenly looked nervous. "You know all the dangerous Americans, don't you? Take my advice, and don't run around town asking that question. All I can know is it started with some guy named Williams. Came here after World War II, and got hooked up with the Soviets. Set up an empire, pays off the government to let his family do anything they want." The bartender leaned in, locking eyes with Jonathan. "And I mean anything." With that, the bartender stepped away to help other customers. Jonathan's mind reeled at everything he'd just learned, slowly piecing the puzzle together. He had every reason to believe that the Davidson family here was connected to his family back home, and he now knew the name of the people who'd been hunting them down for generations. But two important questions remained. Who was leading the Williams family now? And what connection, if any, did they have to Esther? At that moment, a phone rang in the library of a grand palace on the outskirts of Havana. The butler picked up the call, walked to a room, and knocked gently on the door. "Sir, he's arrived in Havana. He's at the Hotel Grand." "Good. Time to see how he handles himself." The man sat in an ornate, high-backed chair, pensively rapping his knuckles on the table as he considered the butler's news. How did things go at the border? They snuck past the patrol boats and docked 40 miles west. He made his way to Havana by train, and then showed up at the Hotel Grand and ordered their most expensive brandy for everyone in the bar. The old man laughed. "Trying to draw us out, evidently. Impressive. Shall we arrange to bring him here, sir?" "No. Our paths will cross when the time is right." Back at the Hotel Grand, Jonathan had finished his first drink and ordered another. This time, he left an extremely generous tip and showed the receipt to the bartender. "This is yours, if you let me use your phone to make a call." Without a word, the bartender handed him his phone and walked off with the receipt, eyes wide at the number Jonathan had written. Jonathan quickly dialed Jack's number and wasted no time when he picked up. "It's me. I'm fine, but I'm in Cuba. How's Norman?" "Stable. They got the shrapnel out, and he should make a full recovery." Jack paused. His concern was evident. "What's your status? Is there anything we can do?" "Things are more complex down here than we imagined. I'm still trying to figure out an exit strategy. So just get some boats in the water as close to Havana as possible. Is Maria with you?" "She is. She fainted last night, and she's sleeping it off." Jonathan's breath hitched. "Is she okay? Is it serious?" "It's a fever, likely from the stress in the choppy sea. But we have all the doctors we need. It's nothing to worry about." Jonathan sighed, knowing all too well how difficult it was for her to be on a boat in the first place, no less under the current circumstances. "If she wakes up, tell her not to worry, and I'll find a way back as soon as possible." "We'll be ready. Be careful, sir." Jonathan ended the call, cleared the call history, and signaled to the bartender that he was finished. As he passed the phone back, he gripped the bartender's hand and locked eyes with him. "I'll be back, and I'll make it worth your while. I just have one more question. How does an American get a car around here?" The bartender bounced his eyes and glanced over his shoulder, letting out a sharp whistle. A man looked up from the corner table and flashed a gold-toothed grin. "That's Luis. If the price is right, he can get you just about anything." A few hours later, Jonathan was pulling out of Havana behind the wheel of a mint-condition vintage Chevy Bel Air. He felt certain his actions were being monitored, most likely by the head of the Davison family. But he had no idea whether the Williams family was on to him too, and the longer he stayed, the riskier it got. Hoping to bribe his way back to international waters, he headed for the fishing village where he'd first arrived. As Jonathan left Havana, the butler received another phone call and relayed the information to the old man. He listened without reacting, then leveled a firm gaze at the butler. "Keep an eye on the situation. We can't allow anyone to overstep." "Of course, sir. Should I send a unit?" "Not yet. I want to see how he handles himself." As the butler stepped away, the old man lit a cigar, his dark eyes gleaming through the curling smoke. He exhaled, and a smirk crossed his face. "Who would have guessed that of all my sons, he's the second whose kids finally amounted to something? They're unhurried, yet persistent, thoughtful, yet clear-headed. After all these years, we might finally have a worthy descendant. Don't let me down, Jonathan." As Jonathan's Bel Air prowled down the road toward the fishing village, he glanced in the rear view and sensed something was amiss. The road had been completely empty since he left Havana, but suddenly he wasn't alone. Vehicles were trailing him, and the distant whir of a helicopter told him everything he needed to know. Gripping the wheel with white knuckles, he glanced at his map and formulated a plan. He was too outnumbered to confront them directly, but if he could split them up, he might be able to handle them one at a time. A thick patch of forest off the side of the road seemed like his best option. Without missing a beat, Jonathan floored the gas, bolting toward the woods in the distance. His quick reaction caught his pursuers off guard, their tires screeching in protest as they veered off to follow him. Carefully noting the distance between himself and the tree line, Jonathan unbuckled his seatbelt and checked that his gun was tightly secured to his waist. Then, at the last second, he drew the car into reverse and jammed the gas pedal down before diving out the door into the adjacent grass. A gunshot echoed behind him, closely followed by the crunch of metal on metal as his Bel Air slammed into one of the pursuing cars. With the helicopter closing in, Jonathan ran to the smoldering wreckage of the crashed car and took out the 3 dazed occupants. He replenished his ammo from his foe's weapons, then ducked behind the crumpled Bel Air, taking cover until he was able to blow the tires on another car with 2 perfectly placed shots. As 3 more assailants leaped out, Jonathan closed the distance and took out the first man, using his body as a shield while he neutralized the other 2. Hearing more gunfire behind him, Jonathan spun around to see 2 more vehicles hurtling toward him. With lightning reflexes, Jonathan thrust his dagger into a tree trunk, using it as a pivot to evade the strafing vehicle before the driver lost control and slammed into a tree. Quickly scanning the interior of the car, Jonathan's eyes locked onto the eagle tattoo on the man's wrist. So the Williams family had found him after all. But why did none of the other men have the tattoo? Who else wanted him dead? Jonathan was ripped from his train of thought by the sound of the last car bearing down on him, and he took off into the dense trees in an attempt to lose them. As he scrambled through the forest, he could feel the fatigue settling in. He had been running on fumes for 2 days straight without any sleep, and the explosion had taken a toll on his body, making his ears ache and his movements sluggish. He knew he'd have to end this quickly if he wanted to make it out alive. Suddenly, his field of vision brightened. He reached the edge of the forest. The thrumming of the helicopter overhead was deafening, and there was no more cover, nowhere else to hide. With the final vehicle closing the gap behind him, he had no choice but to face them head-on. As he burst from the tree line, the helicopter overhead opened fire. Mustering all of his strength, Jonathan sprinted toward the car, rolling across its hood and drawing the helicopter's fire. Stray bullets meant for Jonathan riddled the man in the front seat, and it careened into a tree before exploding in a fiery blast. Seeing Jonathan stunned, the helicopter swooped lower, opening fire yet again. Darting behind the charred vehicle, he checked his gun and discovered it was empty. Jonathan threw a piece of debris into the forest to draw the gunner's attention, then ran directly at the helicopter, grasping its landing skid just as the pilot ascended. With a final burst of power, Jonathan swung himself into the cabin and made quick work of the oblivious gunner. The pilot then pulled a sidearm and tried to fire, but Jonathan caught his hand and turned the weapon back on him. For a brief moment, Jonathan froze, gasping for breath and marveling at the fact that he had made it through unscathed. That's when he realized there was no one flying the helicopter. Kicking the dead pilot out of the door, Jonathan took the controls and gradually straightened the aircraft. He had never imagined he'd be making his escape this way, but all that mattered was that he made it. Back in the old man's library, the butler huffed his way in with a worried look on his face. "Sir, some of the family members found out about Jonathan and attempted to intercept him. There was a firefight." "Ah," the old man nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. "I imagine that it didn't go well for them." "You're correct. He took them all out. A few Williams enforcers, too. He commandeered their helicopter, and he's headed for the U.S. waters now. No sign of the Cuban military." "Very good. Just keep an eye on those Williams boys. If they send another chopper after him, you take it down. Jonathan has more than proven himself today." An hour later, Jonathan finally came within view of the yacht that Jack had arranged to wait on the edge of Cuban waters. When he finally set the helicopter down and shut off the engines, a huge crowd formed on the deck to cheer his return. Just inside the cabin, Norman gingerly sat up in his hospital bed and watched with relief as Jonathan stepped down from the helicopter. He recalled Jonathan's selflessness on the night of the explosion, building a raft out of debris for Norman to lay on so his wounds wouldn't fester, and swimming through brutal currents in an attempt to seek help. It reminded Norman of when he first met Jonathan many years earlier. Norman had grown up an orphan and lived a harsh life, barely scraping by and often resorting to theft to afford food and medical care. During one such episode, he came across Jonathan and his mother at Coney Island. He spotted their expensive clothes and jewelry right away, and when the opportunity struck, he tried to jump them. Unfortunately, the theft didn't go as planned. Jonathan was older and taller, and not only thwarted Norman's attack, but dislocated his shoulder in the process. Norman stubbornly continued to fight through the pain, and before long, Jonathan seemed to grow amused. Pinning Norman and pressing his face into the boardwalk, Jonathan asked him an unexpected question. "Why won't you give up?" Norman paused before telling him the truth. "Because giving up is death. So is not knowing when you're beat. My friend is sick and we can't afford his medicine, all right? So I guess one of us is dead either way." To Norman's surprise, that's when Jonathan offered him a different path. "I'll help your friend, but only if you promise to come to work for me instead of wasting your life out here." And just like that, Norman was pulled from a life of petty crime and introduced to a world he had never imagined. He often thought about how different his life would have been without Jonathan, how long it would have taken for him to end up in prison like all of his friends. It's not that his life was no longer dangerous. If anything, it was even more so. But now, there was loyalty along with the bloodshed, and he relished all of it. For the first time in his life, he felt he had a true purpose. He was a born fighter. A wolf was thriving in the wilderness. After leaving the helicopter, Jonathan rushed to Nancy's bedside. Despite the medication she had been given, her fever hadn't fully retreated. Her face was a feverish flush, her eyes closed, and her brows pinched with discomfort. Leaning down, he pressed a gentle kiss between her furrowed brows. Stirred by the kiss, Nancy's eyes fluttered open, taking in Jonathan's familiar scent and comforting gaze. Was it a dream? Had he really come back? Nancy tried to raise her hand to make sure he was real, and Jonathan took her hand in his. "I'm so sorry, darling. Everything is fine now." Nancy felt the cold sensation of his palm, starkly contrasting her feverish skin. As his grip tightened, her clouded mind slowly started to clear. She focused on Jonathan. Then, suddenly, her eyes went cold and she turned her head away. Her first concern had been his well-being, but her second was that he had knowingly put himself in such a dangerous situation. Following James onto that yacht struck her as a little more than a death wish, and one that was nearly granted. She tried to free her hand from his grip, but he held on strong, picking up a glass of water and bringing it to her lips. "You still have a fever. You need to stay hydrated." But Nancy huffed and turned away. Jonathan narrowed his eyes, then tried a different tact. "Will you drink it if I leave you alone?" Nancy nodded, and Jonathan let her go. "All right then. I'll just be in the bathroom cleaning up." Jonathan took his time getting undressed right next to her, and despite her anger, she couldn't help stealing glances. When she looked up, she met Jonathan's eyes, and a teasing smirk formed on his lips. "Go on then. Drink up." His muscular, wheat-toned body was marred with bruises and abrasions, making Nancy's heart twinge with worry and sympathy. She longed to touch them, to soothe the hurt, but she held back, reminding herself she still had a point to make. Jonathan had a wife now, and spoke of having kids soon. He couldn't keep acting like he was an army of one. She had already lived through the terror of nearly losing him once. How could he put her through it again so soon? Catching Nancy in a long gaze at his torso, Jonathan leaned in and kissed her deeply, running his hands gently over her body. Contented with the kiss, Jonathan stepped away and strolled towards the bathroom. As he disappeared from view, Nancy stared at his retreating figure, her heart thumping in her chest. She clenched her fists, biting back a rush of emotions. Even if he returned from his shower and tried to sweeten her up, she would stay resolute. When he emerged from the bathroom, she pretended to be asleep as he eased into bed beside her. It was a smaller bed than they were accustomed to and left no room for space between them. Jonathan didn't rush for another kiss. Instead, he pulled her closer, cradling her head on his shoulder. "Sweetheart, I knew I'd come back no matter what. That's why I took the risk." Nancy remained silent, listening as he continued. "But I also know I caused you to worry, and I'm sorry." His voice softened. "When Jack told me you were on the rescue boat, all I could think about was how sick and terrified you must have been. We both knew James was likely to try something, and I should have been better prepared." Nancy took a deep breath and held back her emotions, her eyelids remaining shut. "I've been through a lot these past few days, and I've barely slept. At least let me hold you. It's the only way I can find peace." True to his words, Jonathan was asleep less than a minute later. Nancy finally let her eyes open, and they drifted up to his face. His eyebrows were pressed together in his sleep, and she gently smoothed them with her fingertips, causing him to inhale deeply and sink further into slumber. As she studied the bruises on his body, she couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him. She knew Jonathan was a strategic man, but she also knew him to be a risk-taker. That was a scary enough habit on home turf, but they had no allies where he had been. She sighed softly, saddened by her inability to share his burden. As she pressed her body into his, he instinctively nuzzled into her hair, and a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. After days of frenzied panic, she finally felt her heart settle into its normal rhythm. With that comforting thought, she closed her eyes and fell asleep. Their boat sped through the night and the following day, and by the time Jonathan woke up, it was dawn of the second morning. Nancy was once again tucked in his arms, and she stirred awake when she heard his groggy voice reach out. "Maria, did we dock yet?" Nancy gave a soft nod. "Last night." "Why didn't you wake me?" You were so exhausted. I didn't want to disturb you. Jonathan's hand closed around her wrist, pulling her back into his arms. Sweetheart, is your cold any better? She nodded. And the fainting spells? If you'd been around, I wouldn't have fainted. They shared a warm smile, and he slowly climbed out of bed and dressed before her. By the time they made it out to the deck, everyone but Jack had disembarked or been transferred to a hospital. Jack hurried over and passed them coffees. Are we headed back to the apartment? Jonathan nodded. Did the gene report come in yet? Not that I know of, but Brock got in touch a few days ago. What did you say? I was discreet. I said you'd call him when you had time. Good. Contact Dr. Chang and see if we can meet him later today. In the meantime, Maria and I have some matters we need to discuss. By the time they reached home, the sun was out and the streets were full. Ensconced in their penthouse high above, Jonathan guided Nancy to the table and sat down next to her, his tone heavy. Maria, everything we thought we knew, it barely scratches the surface of what's going on in Cuba. Nancy leaned back to listen, narrowing her eyes. Our intel about our enemies holding sway there is true, but there's at least one more powerful family, and that might not be all. They've been established there for decades, well before the embargo, and despite their colonial roots, they still maintain considerable sway over the government and the military. They have the means to pay off anyone, and in return, the government protects them from scrutiny. Did you get their names? Jonathan nodded. The eagle tattoo is associated with the less powerful of the two, the Williams family. Nancy gasped. Do you think it has anything to do with the men going after Esther? We can't count it out. But that's not even the most surprising part. The other family is the Davidsons. Nancy shook her head in disbelief. It stands to reason that we're related, and that the common enemy of my family, their family, and your family, is the Williams clan. That's who set up the trap for Stark, and likely for James as well. Unsurprisingly, they targeted me as I was trying to leave the country, but of the dozen men I fought off, only a few had the tattoo, meaning there were other groups involved. At this, Nancy's hand shot up to her mouth. Hearing about his ordeal brought tears to her eyes, and her words got caught in her throat. Sensing her distress, Jonathan gave her hand a comforting squeeze before he continued. Assuming the Davidsons are in fact my relatives, the most likely explanation is a fracture of some kind during my grandfather's generation. That means the most likely head of the Davidson family is my father's brother. What's more, I got the distinct impression that all of my movements in Cuba were being watched and aided by some unseen force. This means, besides the Williams, there's another faction that wants me dead and a third that wants me alive. What do you make of that? Nancy pondered for a moment. If you're part of the lineage, you pose a threat to anyone else who hopes to take over your uncle's empire. They don't see you as family. They see you as competition. That's plenty of reason to want you dead. Look at my brilliant wife. I did hear he had multiple sons. And in a world like theirs, there are no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. That's why my cousin sought the Williams family support in bringing me down. He paused, deep in thought, then added, From what I saw, it doesn't seem like the Davidson and Williams families are direct adversaries in a business sense. There's no capitalism to speak of, so they both benefit from the system staying the same. Nancy furrowed her brow. Then why are they after us? Maybe it's personal, or maybe it's all about leverage. They can't directly compete with American families because of the embargo, but they can do their best to keep them down and spread influence internationally. And the Davidson family has no incentive to help your family because if you and Steve disappear, they might be able to swoop in and claim a fold in the United States. Exactly. But if everyone benefits from me being dead, then why am I still alive? Nancy shook her head, gazing into the distance and focusing intently. Suddenly, Jonathan pulled her into his lap. Do you have any idea how adorable you are when you're working on a problem? Nancy blushed. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of the first time I saw you. when you pestered that professor about his blueprints and didn't even notice I existed." Nancy narrowed her eyes, then suddenly lit up with inspiration. "That's it! Your cousins didn't know you existed, and now that they do, they're coming after you. But you said that the head of the family is likely in your grandfather's generation. If the clan leader is your uncle, what incentive would he have to help you?" Jonathan's eyes went wide. "He needs an heir. And if your cousins knew he favored you, then they would have all the reason to want you dead, even if it meant teaming up with their rivals. It all makes sense. It just leaves one more question." Nancy looked up at him in curiosity. "What's next?" Reeling from the mountain of revelations, Nancy turned to Jonathan and wrapped her arms around his neck. "You've only been gone, 3 days? And you already pieced this much information together? Very impressive, Mr. Davis." "Think I would have made a good spy?" "No way. You're too striking. Everyone would notice you wherever you went." He arched an eyebrow and leaned in to share a soft kiss. After breakfast, Jonathan went to Dr. Chang's clinic to receive the results of his and Ashley's DNA tests. He exited the building with an inscrutable expression, and Jack narrowed his eyes. "What's the news, boss?" Jonathan shook his head in disbelief and locked eyes with Jack. "We better get over to Brock's." After a poor night of sleep, Ashley had woken up early that morning and prepared a lavish breakfast for her and Brock. Surprised at first, Brock then moved to freshen up before heading out. Ashley, however, darted to his side, taking his arm in her grasp. It was rare for her to make such gestures. It felt awkward, but she persisted. "Brother, I made breakfast. Let's eat together." Brock made to withdraw his arm, but Ashley clung to him, her grip tight. "I'm sorry, brother." She paused, her voice cracking with sincerity. "I never considered your feelings. I was so excited about the idea of having another brother that I didn't stop to think whether it was causing you pain." Brock didn't reply, but stopped pulling away. "I've thought about it, and the truth is, it doesn't matter to me whether he's my brother or not. You've always been the only brother I need." Ashley's lips trembled as she spoke, her eyes reddening with the effort of holding back tears. "He doesn't want me, and I don't need him. Besides, you and I are perfect as we are. The dynamic duo." Brock finally looked up at her, smiling at the sound of the nickname their mother had given them when they were inseparable as children. Finally, he opened his arms and drew her into a comforting hug. "Water under the bridge, sis. But there's something you should know. Things got bad at the company and Dad fired me. If you stick with me, things could get tough." Ashley looked up in shock. "What happened? He won't reconsider?" "I wouldn't say yes even if he did. I'm tired of living under his thumb, and now I have the perfect opportunity to strike out on my own. I still own 50% of Unique, so I'll focus on growing that brand. And if I need to dip into my savings to kickstart other projects, so be it." Suddenly, Ashley's face lit up. "How much do you need? Mom gave me her money when she died. As far as I'm concerned, it's yours." Brock's eyes went wide. "Sis, she wanted you to have it. It's okay." But Ashley had already thrust the card into his hands. "The passport is Mom's birthday." "Are you sure?" "Of course. We're in it together. Brother and sister. Like always." Brock nodded with gratitude and guided her to the dining table, only to be interrupted by the doorbell. Who could that be? But his face soured when he saw Jonathan on his doorstep. Well, look who rose from the dead. "I'm not here for you, Brock. I need to speak with Ashley." "Too bad." "Is she here?" "I said too bad." Ignoring Brock's resistance, Jonathan pushed past him into the house, and his gaze settled on Ashley. Ashley glanced up, locking eyes with Jonathan for a fleeting moment. She quickly looked away, feigning indifference. Undeterred, Jonathan walked over to her. "Ashley, I have the DNA report." Good for you. Don't you want to know the results? Without looking at him, she reached her hand out and Jonathan handed her the documents. Glancing at the sheet, she shrugged and handed it back. Guess that's it then. Thank you so much for finding time in your busy schedule to stop by. Jonathan glanced at the breakfast spread on the table and put his hands up in deference. Enjoy your meal, but when you're finished, there's somewhere we need to go. Brock let out a sarcastic chuckle. And what? You think she's just going to go with you? We were the ones who sought you out for this report in the first place, and you didn't give a damn. At Brock's retort, Jonathan lifted his eyes, unbothered. Mr. Porter sure seems agitated. What's the matter? Problems at the office? Brock was about to respond when Ashley interjected. Just ignore him, brother. Let's have breakfast. Brock grudgingly agreed, and the siblings sat down for their meal. Jonathan took a seat across the room, then glanced at Ashley as she ate. Truth be told, he had never liked her. He was drawn to competent women, not rich or powerful ones. And between Ashley's brashness, entitlement, and antagonizing of Maria, she'd given him plenty of reasons to write her off. Or worse. And yet, a single DNA report had brought them into a relationship he could never have anticipated. Siblings. In light of the news, he was doing his best to see her in a more generous light. He had to admit that she had a fierce disposition, and perhaps he'd prejudged her, purely because of his relationship to his biggest rival. In reality, they were very different people. As he watched her, he suddenly began to see the resemblance between them. She had his father's cheekbones and his sharp jawline. Just then, Ashley seemed to notice his scrutiny and choked on her eggs. Brock quickly handed her a glass of water. Slow down, Ashley. Then he threw a glance over his shoulder at Jonathan. We don't have anywhere to be. Ignoring Brock's provocation, Jonathan watched as Ashley took a few gulps of water and cleared out her throat, her face flushing bright red. At that moment, Jonathan felt something shift within him. Seeing her in such a vulnerable state, knowing they shared his father's blood, he couldn't help but see a person he wanted to protect. It occurred to him that despite her troublesome behavior in the past, he never made her account for it, not even when she challenged Nancy. They embarrassed her in the end, but they had done it privately, and only to prove a point. Was it possible that their shared heritage had influenced him, even before he knew of it? Ordinarily, his retribution would have come swiftly and ruthlessly. In his 30 short years, he'd run countless people out of the city. He'd taken down businesses, ruined careers, and even killed when he had to. That's what it meant to shoulder the responsibility of his family business after the death of his brothers. He had to build his empire step by step, never showing mercy to those who crossed him. But with Ashley, for some reason, it had always been different. Maybe it was the intensity of Jonathan's gaze, but Ashley finally looked up at him. Their eyes met, and he instinctively scowled, only to ease his features moments later. She was his sister, and she deserved his respect. They exchanged a polite nod, and Ashley returned to her meal. Jonathan waited patiently until they were both done eating, but when Brock stood up from the table, it was clear that he didn't plan on letting Ashley go anywhere with Jonathan. He placed a protective hand on Ashley's shoulder. Come with me to Soho. I want to buy you something special. Ashley hesitated, then gave a nod. Just let me grab my coat. As Ashley rose, Jonathan was already standing. Ashley. Ignoring him, she made her way toward the bedroom. Jonathan reached out to grab her arm, but Brock intercepted, blocking his reach. What do you think you're doing? Jonathan's eyes narrowed as he looked at Brock. If you stop her, it could cost you dearly in the future. Are you threatening me? Brock scoffed. Like it or not, Brock, she's exactly as much my sister now as she is yours, and I'm telling you this is important. He turned to Ashley. You need to come with me to the hematology center. Her face blanched, and her eyes rimmed red. Just leave us alone, Jonathan. Can't you see we don't want you here? Jonathan didn't break eye contact, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. People from the Davis family have hereditary blood issues. When Brightstar was taken down by your brother here, I was in the hospital dealing with those issues. They nearly killed me, and since you're my father's daughter, it's possible you have the same problem." The revelation left both Brock and Ashley in shock, trading glances until Jonathan continued. "Now come with me. Let's get it checked out." Jonathan's tone softened. "You can't take risks with your health, Ashley." "Is it serious?" "Very. That's why we need to treat it as early as possible." Jonathan reached out to take her arm, but Brock stepped between them. "I'm going to. You can ride with me, Ashley." Without another word, Jonathan went back to his car and led the way to Dr. Chang's clinic. As soon as they arrived, they were led straight to an examination room. When Dr. Chang entered, he greeted Jonathan, who directed his attention to Ashley. "As you know, this is my half-sister Ashley. My mother isn't aware yet, and given her fragile health, I hope we can help keep this confidential for now." "Of course, Mr. Davis. Your secret is safe with me. As for you, Miss Porter, I assure you, you're in the best possible hands. My team has been working tirelessly on this disorder since Jonathan first presented with it, and we've made real strides in delaying the effects. We were able to cure Jonathan entirely, so I don't want you to be afraid." Ashley nodded and extended her arm, wincing as the nurse set the catheter and began drawing blood samples. When she finished, Dr. Chang took the vials and stepped toward the door. "Give me an hour, and we'll have your results." Jonathan nodded. "We'll wait here. Thank you, Doctor." When the door shut behind Dr. Chang, an awkward hush settled over the room. Jonathan glanced at Brock standing motionless in the corner, then looked at Ashley and saw that their eyes were welling with tears. She met his gaze, and her voice came out shaky and thin. "Be honest, Jonathan. Does it hurt?" Scooting his chair closer, Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's painless, and I'm living proof that there's a cure out there. If you have it, we'll get you the medicine you need, no matter what." Time seemed to crawl as Jonathan, Brock, and Ashley waited for the results of her blood test. Brock stayed glued to his phone in the corner while Ashley stared into the distance, and Jonathan tried to comfort her. Finally, a smirk played on his lips and he pulled his phone out, dialing a number. "Latham, are you free this weekend? Let's plan a get-together with Hannah and Xavier. I have someone I want you to meet." At the mention of Hannah's name, Brock's attention instantly shifted to Jonathan. He listened closely as Jonathan hung up and turned to Ashley. "Are you free Saturday? Since you're part of the family now, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine." Ashley nodded tentatively. "Sure, I'll be there. Thanks, Jonathan." Jonathan saw Brock clench his phone tightly in his fist, and despite his instincts, decided to extend an olive branch. "Brock, you can join us too if you want, but I expect you to respect Hannah's space." Brock narrowed his eyes in resentment, but before he could respond, Dr. Chang entered with a serious expression. Jonathan sprung to his feet and addressed him. "Did you get the result?" Dr. Chang nodded. "As expected. Mrs. Porter's blood shows the same anomaly as yours, Mr. Davis. Given her age, we can safely assume that she has at least a year before symptoms present themselves." Brock suddenly stepped forward. "And then?" "I need to analyze the specifics. It's too early to draw a conclusion." Jonathan nodded. "All right. With James gone and Kim out of the picture, we've lost access to that avenue. But I trust your team can make progress, and I have other options to pursue in the meantime. Don't worry about funding. If you need any support, contact me." "Of course, Mr. Davis. We will give it our best shot. And don't worry, Ashley. You're in good hands." As the group left the research center, Ashley turned to Jonathan and took his arm. "Thank you, and I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first." Jonathan glanced down at her and suddenly noticed how her eyes shone in the sunlight. So this is what it felt like to have a sister. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "No need to thank me. It's what big brothers are for." She smiled back at him, and they both nodded, their new relationship taking shape before their eyes. A wave of warmth filled Jonathan's heart, resonated with the shared blood that bound them. Just then, a look of worry flashed across Ashley's face. "Where have you been? Why wouldn't you return our calls about the test results?" Jonathan leaned in, lowering his voice. "I was on the yacht that exploded out in Long Island Sound." "What?" Ashley gasped, shocked and worried. "It's okay. I'm all right. But we have to keep this quiet. I'll tell you the full story when the time is right." With that, Jonathan straightened up and glanced at Brock before heading toward the parking lot. "See you Saturday, Ashley. And remember what I said about being respectful, Brock." When Jonathan made it back to his car, he called Nancy to update her on everything that had happened. "Honey, the results are in. Ashley, she's really my sister." Nancy's voice was still weak from fever, but her shock was apparent. "Did you talk to her? What about Brock?" "He'll get over it. And Ashley isn't responsible for the way he treated Hannah. Speaking of which, I'd like to get all of our friends together to meet her this weekend. Think you'll be up for it?" "I'll be there. After all, I can't let your new sister replace me as the most important woman in your life." Jonathan laughed at her playful jab. "Don't worry, darling. I'll always spoil you the most." "You better. You've seen what happens to men who cross me." "And I don't plan on being one of them." Nancy sighed. I know she grew up rich, but she still had it pretty hard. Both of her parents are gone. She knows hardly anyone in the city. You could really help her out. "My wife's so magnanimous today. Are you really not jealous?" "Not anymore. I know I have you wrapped around my finger." Jonathan smiled. "That you do, my love. Now get back to resting and I'll see you tonight." With that, Jonathan hung up and headed for the office for the first time in days. Given Ashley's prognosis and everything he learned in Cuba, he was going to have to push even harder to expand the Davis Group's wealth and influence. It was the only surefire way to keep his family safe from the powerful forces lined up against them. Nancy regained her strength over the following days, and before she knew it, Saturday arrived. Rummaging through her closet for the right outfit, she spotted a pair of matching sportswear sets she'd bought for her and Jonathan. With a smile, she changed into her pink and white sports bra and leggings and set aside Jonathan's shirt and shorts on the bed. Upon entering the room, Jonathan's eyes lit up at the sight of her. Her ponytail and athletic outfit accentuated her youth and vigor, and the flush in her cheeks suggested she had finally recovered from her fever earlier in the week. A smirk played at the corner of Jonathan's lips as he moved towards her, pressing her against the closet and claiming her lips with his own. He teased her neck with his teeth, murmuring, "You should know not to tempt me like this in the middle of the day. I love a lady in uniform." Nancy found herself caught between laughter and exasperation. "It's just gym clothes. How does it count as a uniform?" Jonathan ignored her question and continued his playful advances while Nancy protested. "Not now! Everyone is waiting on us." "They can wait a little longer." With a surprising burst of strength, Nancy pushed Jonathan back and smiled, pointing to the outfit she laid out for him on the bed. "Instead of taking my clothes off, why don't you put on yours?" Jonathan glanced at the fitted shirt and shorts, and his eyes glinted with interest. "What's in it for me?" "If you're good today, maybe I'll give you a special treat later." Without missing a beat, Jonathan changed his clothes and gave her a wink. "How about now? Is Her Majesty pleased?" Nancy nodded. She wanted to keep joking with him, but seeing him in the form-fitting workout clothes left her at a loss for words. The usual aura of danger and coolness that surrounded him had receded, replaced by a youthful charm that made her blush. He clocked her reaction and bounced his eyebrows. "What is it? You like what you see?" Nancy bit her lip, and Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "Well, there's plenty more where that came from." Before Nancy could respond, Jonathan swept her onto the bed and pressed his body against hers. By the time they were done, both of their brows were dabbed with sweat, and their cheeks were flushed from exertion. Their destination for the weekend was a sprawling mountain resort in the Catskills, owned by the Davis Group. Jonathan had instructed Jack to close it down to everyone but his personal guests for the weekend, ensuring both immaculate service from the staff as well as some much-needed privacy. By the time Nancy and Jonathan arrived, everyone else had already gathered. The weather was pleasant, and they found everyone lounging on the grass in the courtyard, sipping their drinks and engaging in lively conversation. As they approached, Latham caught sight of them and groaned. "Did you two seriously wear matching outfits? You know the rest of us are all single, right?" Met with silence, Latham turned to nudge Xavier. "Tell him, buddy." Xavier merely offered a cryptic smile. "Speak for yourself." Latham gasped. "Betrayed by my own brother." Nearby, Esther was engrossed in conversation with Jack. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Xavier sooner. I assumed you found out from Jonathan, but I didn't want you to hear from me through a text." Jack waved off her concerns. "I'm just happy you're happy. My mother, on the other hand." Esther laughed. "Please give her my deepest apologies." "Done. Just don't forget to invite me to your wedding reception, and I expect a good seat." Esther's eyes twinkled as she leaned in with a whisper. "If you need a hot date when the time comes, just let me know." Esther turned to greet Nancy, but as she did, Xavier pushed a plate of freshly peeled fruits toward her. Latham tried to snatch some for herself, but was promptly swatted away by Xavier. Esther laughed from across the table and took an indulgent bite of a kiwi. "Ugh, so satisfying to have these ready to eat. Too bad there's only enough for one." Latham chuckled at the sight of Xavier and Esther playing off each other, but beneath his smile, he was struck by melancholy. It was the anniversary of the day that he and Olivia had met back in college. They'd known each other for 8 years, and she had been gone for nearly a 9th. Despite the months that had passed, Latham still struggled to remind himself that Esther wasn't her. Her strikingly similar features constantly reminded him of his lost love. And on such a painful day, he couldn't bear the resemblance. Turning away, he grabbed a glass of wine and drained its contents in one go. To all who were present, he seemed to be the jovial, carefree Latham everyone knew. Amid the stir, Jonathan stepped forward with Ashley's hand in his and called for everyone's attention. The courtyard slowly turned to them, and as usual, Latham was the first to speak. My, parading another woman around in front of your wife. I dare say, Mr. Davis is asking for trouble." The group laughed and glanced at Nancy, but she remained unfazed. Finally, Jonathan's deep voice quieted everyone down. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment, there's a reason I asked you all out here for this weekend. If you're here, that means we're not just friends, we're family. And after some surprising news last week, I need to introduce you to our family's newest member." Releasing Ashley's arm, he nudged her out in front of him. "This is Ashley Porter. I know a few of you are acquainted, but what you didn't know is that Ashley is actually my half-sister. She's new to our city, so I want you all to make sure she's well taken care of." Ashley blushed and waved at the group, but they were all momentarily frozen in shock. Pushing through it, Ashley raised her glass and cleared her throat. Toast to all of you. I can't tell you how grateful I am to get to know each and every one of you." She downed her drink with gusto, and with Nancy's encouragement, everyone joined her. Everyone, that is, except Hannah. Her mouth remained wide open as she struggled to reconcile her feelings toward Ashley with her feelings toward Jonathan. As her mind raced with the implications of the news, her heart was struck with a further blow when she spotted a familiar figure at the entrance to the courtyard. It was Brock, and he was staring straight at her. Brock had accompanied Ashley to the gathering, but once they hit the parking lot, he opted for a solitary stroll rather than joining the crowd. As he roamed, his gaze locked onto Hannah from a distance, and his heart was immediately filled with turmoil. He feared speaking to her in case she pressed him on getting a divorce. But he was also desperate for an opportunity to apologize and share his feelings. Torn between the competing impulses, he opted to keep his distance while finding ways to remind her he was still there. Before long, her eyes suddenly locked onto his from across the courtyard. He hadn't expected her to see him, and just as he mustered a weak smile in her direction, a staff member approached him, asking him if he needed anything. He politely declined, but by the time he looked back at Hannah, she had suddenly disappeared. When Jonathan finished introducing Ashley, he joined the crowd in her toast and reclaimed his seat next to Nancy. Ashley followed suit, turning to Nancy with a private toast. "To our new sisterhood, Maria?" Nancy nodded warmly and clinked glasses with Ashley. "From now on, we're family. I'm really sorry about the way I handled our little competition. It was cruel to challenge you so publicly." Nancy brushed off her concerns. "It's water under the bridge. I have to admit, I had a good time." Ashley's eyes sparkled. "I did too. You're such a natural with cars. Can you teach me sometime?" "Of course. It would be my pleasure." Jonathan lightly pinched Nancy's cheek. "Just remember, safety first, darling." Nancy raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. "Questioning my skills, are you?" "Not at all." Jonathan put his arm around her and turned to Ashley. "In fact, you should let Maria show you her workshop someday. She's assembled quite an impressive team over there. They single-handedly designed and prototyped the Phoenix." "That's incredible! I can't wait." At a nearby table, Hannah sat alone, picking at her food when her phone rang. Seeing it was her lawyer, she quickly picked up. "Hannah, I have some good news." "Is there an update from Brock's team?" "Not yet, but one of my colleagues over at the Times saw your portfolio and put in a word for you. They want to bring you on as junior editorial staff." Hannah's eyes lit up. "I can't believe it. Thank you so much." "My pleasure. Any friend of Mr. Davis is a friend of mine. Now regarding your divorce suit." Hannah interrupted, suddenly energized. "What's the fastest way we can be done with it? I don't need anything from him. I just want out." The lawyer's voice came back tentatively. "Well, it's a little more complicated than that. Unless we can prove that he broke the law or misled you during your marriage, we'll need him to sign off on the terms to move forward. Then I'll start gathering more evidence. We can't keep him trapped forever, right? After you've been separated long enough, a judge will usually force it through. Given your lack of interest in his assets, it's open and shut. But if Mr. Porter wants to drag it out, it could take years." Hannah sighed, but her lawyer chimed back in. "But on to the brighter things. Are you free this afternoon? My friend at the Times would love to meet you for coffee. I can pick you up on the way." Hannah was about to decline, but when she looked about the party, she spotted Ashley bonding with Jonathan and Maria. Suddenly feeling that her place in Jonathan's life was becoming redundant, she set her jaw and responded, "I'm not busy. I'll send you my location. See you soon." After lunch, the rest of the group prepared for a mountain hike up to the resort spa and lodge. As they stretched and gathered supplies, Latham pulled Xavier aside. "You know we can all see what's going on between you and Esther, right? Why are you keeping things under wraps?" Xavier smiled. "Waiting for the right moment." "God, you're all so weird. Matching outfits, sneaking around. Whatever happened to good old-fashioned dating?" Just then, Esther walked up and Xavier put his arm around her. "How about we climb to the summit and watch the sunset?" Esther glanced at the mountain. "Isn't there a cable car or something?" "Nope," Jonathan said. "But we could make it to the top in an hour if we hustle." Nancy's expression drooped. "No way. I can't climb that in an hour. Not after this afternoon." Jonathan took her hand and moved in close. "Need a piggyback ride?" She looked around and saw that the others were already making their way up the mountain. Even Esther had begrudgingly set off down the trail. With a steely determination, she shrugged off Jonathan's hand and headed for the trailhead. As the group wound their way up the mountain, the evening breeze kept them cool, and the sun filtered through the forest canopy, offering a gentle warmth. Fresh buds adorned the branches, and the leaves rustled with the optimism of spring. Before Nancy knew it, they were halfway up, but with the sun falling faster and faster, Nancy's worn-out legs were becoming heavier and heavier. Looking at the remaining trail, she felt her entire body quake. Suddenly, Jonathan stepped in front of her and crouched. "Hop on, or we'll miss the sunset." Nancy opened her mouth to refuse, but before she could get the words out, Jonathan hoisted her onto his back and rose steadily, bearing her weight with ease. She swatted his back in embarrassment. "Stop it! They're all going to make fun of me." "No, they won't," Jonathan replied with a hint of mischief in his voice. "They'll just admire my strength." Nancy's cheeks burned, and she swatted him again. But as they caught up with the others, and she saw their amused glances, all she could think to do was to bury her face in his shoulder until it was over. Just then, Latham sidled up next to them. "Why so tired, Maria? Could it have something to do with the reason you two were so late this afternoon?" Nancy groaned, and Jonathan smirked, but Ashley tilted her head in confusion. "What do you mean? Were you guys working out earlier?" Latham laughed. "Oh, they were working out all right. How many sets did you guys manage? 2? 3? Ashley narrowed her eyes. 3 doesn't seem like enough to get you that tired." "It is when your partner is as vigorous as Jonathan." Laughter rang out among the group, and Ashley suddenly realized what Latham was implying. Her face flushing beet red, she rushed ahead up the trail. When the group finally reached the summit an hour and a half later, they found a beautiful mountain lodge with an attached spa. The estate housed 6 rooms, and with everyone sweaty from their strenuous hike, they all agreed to shower and change before meeting up for dinner. After waving goodbye to the group as they headed up the mountain, Hannah turned toward the parking lot to meet her lawyer and found a man lounging in the grass nearby. It was Brock. He sprang to his feet when he spotted Hannah, calling out her name as he closed the gap between them. "Hannah, I'm so glad to finally get you alone. I've been dying to talk." Hannah met his gaze slowly, dressed in a suit and tie. His once glossy leather shoes were dulled by the dusty trails around the resort. He appeared to have brought nothing besides a pack of cigarettes, clearly having skipped lunch in anticipation of seeing her. Just as Hannah felt a pang of sympathy for him, her thoughts halted abruptly. Her psychiatrist had warned that revisiting specific topics might trigger a depressive relapse. She knew she had to confront her issues in the long term, but until she regained her footing, she refused to let Brock send her back into the darkness. Looking away, she pushed past Brock like an irrelevant puff of air. "Sorry, I was just leaving." "Please give me a chance." But Hannah didn't look back, continuing toward the parking lot with Brock gazing after her. In the tranquility of the mountains, Latham found himself overwhelmed with thoughts of Olivia and decided to take a solitary ride on horseback. Meandering his way into a secluded spot, away from the commotion of the lodge, he only dismounted once he was certain that the only sounds he heard were the rustling whispers of the woods. He tethered his horse to a nearby tree and retrieved a bottle of wine from his backpack, settling himself on the soft grass. His perspective shifted as he reclined, and his gaze soon settled onto the towering trees above him, dappled with the dying light of the sun as it filtered through the leaves. Bits of the darkening sky peeked through the verdant canopy, and colorful clouds swept across them like streaks of paint. As he lay there in thought, a wave of loneliness swept over Latham, as formidable as a tempest that could raise mountains and stir seas. Memories surfaced unbidden from an earlier time when he climbed these very same mountains with Olivia after they first met. It was their first day trip out of the city together, and Latham had purposefully raced ahead on the trail, leaving Olivia panting in his wake. Teasing her for her lack of stamina, he offered his hand and vowed to guide her up. It was a juvenile ploy to hold her hand, and it worked. From that moment on, neither let go. They watched the sunset together, and under the cloak of darkness, he led her back down, stealing a kiss amidst the shadows at the mountain's base. The memory of their synchronized heartbeats still resonated within him, but he found no such resonance in others now. He was still so young, yet he felt her absence profoundly. Drowning his solitude in drink, he didn't even notice the ringing of his phone, which he discarded in his backpack. His focus remained on the fading sky, the world quieting around him. The twilight deepened, and even his horse seemed to finally drift into slumber. Latham traced the shadows dancing on the trees, and a sardonic smile spread across his face as he realized that not even an animal wanted to be around him. Just then, his solitude was broken by the sound of distant footfalls. His pulse quickened. Could it be her? Had Olivia heard his pleading and finally returned to him? He pushed to his feet, and the world seemed to tilt around him. Steadying himself against a tree, he squinted at the approaching figure, but her features remained indistinct, shrouded in the dim light of the moon. "Latham, is that you?" The words had barely left Ashley's lips when Latham's arms wrapped around her. His strength, intensified by his emotions, caused her to flinch and struggle against his hold. "Ouch! Let go of me, Latham!" Immediately, his grip slackened, his expression shifting from dazed to regretful. "I'll never let go of you again. I did it once, and it was the biggest mistake I ever made." His voice was ragged with remorse as he embraced her, whispering hoarsely, "Olivia, you've finally come back. I've waited for you. It's been so long." Ashley reeled as she took in Latham's drunken rambling. It was clear that he'd mistaken her for another woman in his days. And though she could tell his pain was genuine, she worried what might happen if she reacted too forcefully. Softly, she clarified, "Latham, it's Ashley, not the Olivia you're talking about." But her words fell on deaf ears. As he tightened his grip around her, her chest seized and blood rushed to her head. She worried he might smother her if it went on too long, and recalling how he'd responded to her saying she was in pain, she drew in just enough breath to whisper in his ear, "It hurts, Latham. Please." Recalling how he'd responded earlier, she whispered, "It hurts." Latham jolted back and momentarily appeared to have regained awareness, but then he took his face in her hands and lowered his lips towards her. Ashley tensed and spun to the side, redirecting his kiss to her cheek instead. He let out a pained whimper. "Olivia, why won't you let me kiss you? Do you not love me anymore?" "Latham, listen to me. I'm not Olivia." Tension wound tight in her mind, and her fists clenched. She was just about to lash out when she tasted something salty on her lips. Confused, she gingerly reached up and traced the moisture from her cheeks to Latham's. Her heart ached as she pieced together the truth. Latham was crying. It was almost impossible to believe that the lively, gregarious man she had met hours earlier had fallen so far in such a little time. In the enveloping darkness, Ashley gently pulled her face away from his. His eyes were squeezed shut, but tears still seeped out. His brow was furrowed, as if he was grappling with an insurmountable problem, and his face was twisted with despair. It was an entirely new phenomenon for Ashley. The men she'd grown up with, Brock and her father, had always seemed unassailable. She had never seen them shed a tear, and for all, she knew they were incapable. Even Jonathan, who she barely knew, seemed to be unshakable, even when mountains were crumbling around him. Yet now, looking at Latham, she saw not weakness, but vulnerability. One tortured soul reaching out for comfort. After what seemed like eternity, Latham drew back, his voice trembling. "Olivia, do you know what today is? Did you know that today is the 8th anniversary of the day we met? Life is so fleeting." Ashley gently lifted Latham's face, and his eyes stared blankly back at her, still damp from his tears. She wiped them away, then turned on her phone's flashlight, holding it to her face. Look at me, Latham. I'm not Olivia. I'm Ashley. His gaze was still foggy, but it started to sharpen. When the harsh light illuminated her face, she saw her reflection in his pupils, and a rush of fury overtook him. Abruptly, he shoved Ashley away, his chest heaving, his voice rough. What are you doing here? What did you do with her? I was out for a walk and found you. Jonathan and your friends are all worried sick. What are you doing out here anyway? Just go. Leave me alone. Latham roared, but his eyes still glittered with unshed tears. Biting her lip, Ashley reached out with a calm voice. You're confused, Latham. Let me help you. I'll walk you back. No, don't touch me. I don't know what you did to her, but I'll never forgive you. She was so close. Olivia, where are you? With one final wail of agony, Latham collapsed in a heap. Ashley watched him for a moment in stunned silence. His eyes remained closed and unmoving, and his body was contorted uncomfortably. He was nearly unconscious. Not wanting to provoke him further, Ashley made sure he was breathing, then untied his horse and raced back to the lodge. Jonathan, Nancy, and Esther were engaged in a game of cards on the front porch when Ashley rode up on Latham's horse. Everyone turned to her as she dismounted, and she hesitated before speaking. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I found Latham. He was out in the woods drunk and passed out on the ground. I took his horse to come back for help. Jonathan rubbed his temples and handed his cards to Ashley. Thank you. Take over for me here and I'll go get him. I'm sorry you had to see that. 10 minutes later, Jonathan arrived at Latham's side. He sat on the grass next to him and gently patted his shoulder. Latham, it's okay. I know what today is. Upon hearing Jonathan's voice, Latham slowly opened his eyes. Jonathan extended an arm and helped him up. I know you're hurting, but she wouldn't want to see you like this. It's dangerous to pass out alone in the woods. Coming to, Latham's eyes finally lit up with recognition. Jonathan? She was here. Olivia was here. It was a dream, Latham. Now let's go back. Everyone's waiting for you. Jonathan guided a staggering Latham back to his room, and once he was sure that he wouldn't throw up, he beckoned a housekeeper to watch over him for the night. At that same moment, Esther and Xavier slipped out the back door of the main lodge. The moon hung high above them, casting a gentle glow on the landscape and painting distant shadows of trees against the backdrop. Hand in hand, they walked silently down a narrow path until they noticed a sudden movement. Esther gasped, but her fear soon morphed into joy as she realized it was a small rabbit, no more than a few months old. The bunny bounded away, and Esther's eyes lit up, pulling Xavier into a quiet chase. Before long, they found themselves deep in the woods, watching the rabbit take a drink from a small pool of rainwater. Esther pulled a soft tuft of wild grass and knelt down next to it as she reached out her palm. Don't worry, Angel. We just wanted to say hi. What are you doing out here all alone? Her voice was soft and coaxing and drew a wide-eyed gaze from Xavier. Before she knew it, he reached out and wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her to her feet and scaring off the bunny. She started to protest, but before she could get the words out, he pulled her body close and pressed his lips against hers. Caught off guard by the passionate kiss, Esther allowed herself to be drawn in, the grass she had held moments earlier slipping from her fingers. Lifting her hand, she looped it around his neck, and they both succumbed to the moment. When they finished, Esther noticed that the forest had come alive, with the sounds of small creatures rustling through the brush, and soaring tree branches swaying in the breeze. She listened as Xavier's heartbeat thrummed a persistent rhythm in her ear, and she suddenly realized that they had never shared such an intimate moment before. It left her hopeful that they'd finally entered a new phase of their relationship, one in which they could communicate without words, avoid petty arguments, and enjoy each other's company in peace. Just then, a piercing ring of her phone shattered the silence. Esther pulled it from her jacket, her eyes narrowing as she saw the caller ID. It was Dan's manager, Teddy. Esther answered with an eye roll. Teddy? Why the hell are you calling this late? It's Dan. He's hurt bad, Esther. The sound of Teddy's frantic voice set Esther shooting upright. What happened? Where is he? He was filming stunts on the Queen Burroughs Bridge and the cable snapped. He fell at least 20 feet, maybe more. They just took him into surgery. The news hit Esther like a punch. Where are you, Teddy? He stammered, his voice trembling. We're at Columbia. Hurry, Esther. Shoving the phone back in her jacket, Esther jumped to her feet and hastily fixed her disheveled clothing. Xavier watched in shock. Who was that? What's wrong? Esther turned to him with a grave look. Dan had a serious accident on set. I need to get to Columbia Hospital. There's a Jeep at the lodge. We'll take it to the bottom and we'll drive you from there. Esther nodded. Just remember, we can't be seen in public together. You'll have to drop me off and keep driving. Xavier's eyes flashed with frustration, and he hummed in agreement. After conferring with Jonathan, they set out in the Jeep, with one of Jonathan's men driving. It was a jarring ride down the rugged path, but when the truck finally came to a stop in the parking lot, Esther shot out of the back seat like a bullet, thinking only for her brother. Xavier sped the entire way back to the city, and within an hour of Teddy's phone call, they pulled up to the hospital. Esther turned to Xavier and squeezed his hand, her eyes full of fear. Thank you for getting me here. Go get some rest. Not a chance. I'll be waiting nearby to hear from you. Be careful in there, okay? Esther nodded, and Xavier leaned in, gently kissing her cheek. I'm only a phone call away. Esther charged into the hospital and found the atmosphere outside the operating room thick with tension. The first person she spotted was Dan's elegantly dressed co-star, Megan, who perked up as Esther approached. How's my brother? What did the doctor say? Megan shook her head, looking like she'd seen a ghost. There was so much blood. The doctor said surgery couldn't wait, so they rushed him in before any of us got here. All I know is they have him on transfusions. Where's Teddy? I need to know every detail of what happened on that set. I'm not sure. He was calling Dan's friends and dealing with the media. I lost track of him. Megan slouched back into her chair, and Esther gave her shoulder a supportive squeeze before turning away. She had the sneaking suspicion that what happened to Dan wasn't an accident at all, and she wasn't going to rest until she could account for every person who had access to his stunt rig that day. Whoever was after her, she refused to let her brother become a victim. She strode down the nearest corridor, her head on a swivel looking for Teddy, when she suddenly stopped short. In front of her was a tall, impeccably dressed man with his back to her. He had his hand in his pocket and was staring down toward the operating room, his aura intense, almost threatening. Esther felt a strange pull toward him, and as if on cue, he slowly turned to face her, revealing a rugged yet compelling face. Esther gasped, her jaw dropping. She hadn't seen those features in years. Oliver! Is that you?